The previous lessons established how valid contracts are formed, how obligations are created and performed, and how good faith, disclosure, and fairness guide the conduct of all parties involved in a transaction. Building on that foundation, this module focuses on the final and most significant step of a real estate transaction: the closing and the transfer of possession. Closing is where all the promises made in the purchase contract are fulfilled, where ownership legally transfers, and where the duties of the licensee shift from negotiation and representation to compliance, documentation, and lawful delivery of possession. In Arizona, the closing process is governed by both statute and contract. The Arizona Association of Realtors, ER, Residential Resale Real Estate Purchase Contract defines closing as the moment when the deed is recorded at the county recorder's office and the funds are available to the seller. Until recordation occurs, the buyer does not legally own the property, regardless of whether funds have been transferred or documents signed. This moment of recordation, when combined with the delivery of funds, establishes completion of the transaction and triggers possession unless otherwise specified in writing. The escrow process in Arizona is designed to ensure fairness and neutrality between parties. Escrow officers, often employed by title companies, act as impartial third parties who hold the documents and funds until all contractual conditions are satisfied. They verify that loan documents are signed, title defects are cleared, taxes and liens are paid, and funds are distributed according to the settlement statement. The licensee's role during this stage is to coordinate communication among all parties, confirm that all contractual obligations have been fulfilled, and ensure that the closing occurs in compliance with Arizona law and commissioner's rules. A licensee who fails to monitor the closing process or who allows an incomplete file to close can be held accountable under ARS, Paragraph 32-2153 for negligent supervision or failure to perform fiduciary duties. A key responsibility of the licensee is proper documentation and record retention. Arizona law under ARS, Paragraph 32-2151.01 requires designated brokers to maintain complete transaction records, including contracts, escrow instructions, disclosures, addenda, and closing statements, for at least 5 years after the transaction closes. These records must be readily available for inspection by the Arizona Department of Real Estate. The requirement ensures that if a dispute arises, there is a clear record of what was agreed upon and how it was executed. For example, if a buyer later claims that earnest money was mishandled, the broker's documentation must show when the funds were received, where they were deposited, and when they were released. This record keeping not only fulfills legal requirements, but also protects the broker, the licensee, and their clients. The proper handling of trust funds is another essential duty during closing. Earnest money deposits must be placed into a trust account or delivered to escrow according to the timeframes outlined in the contract. Under Arizona law, failure to account for client funds or commingling them with personal accounts is grounds for disciplinary action, including suspension or revocation of a license. For instance, if an agent holds an earnest money check for several days before delivering it to escrow, that delay could violate both the contract and ARS. Paragraph 32-2151. Proper handling of funds demonstrates not only legal compliance, but also adherence to the duty of good faith and fair dealing by protecting all parties' financial interests. Equally important is the transfer of possession, which occurs when the buyer is entitled to take physical control of the property. Unless otherwise specified, possession transfers immediately upon recordation and disbursement of funds. However, situations often arise where possession does not coincide with closing, such as when the seller requests to remain temporarily after closing, or when the buyer allows pre-possession before recording. These scenarios must be addressed through a written agreement that outlines specific terms, including the duration, condition of the property, insurance responsibilities, and any rent or security deposit due. Failure to document possession terms can lead to legal complications or liability. For example, if a seller remains in the home after closing without a written agreement and damages occur, the buyer may face challenges recovering repair costs or evicting the seller. Arizona courts have held that possession rights must be clearly stated in writing to avoid ambiguity and protect both parties' interests. The final walkthrough is another critical component of the closing process. This is typically the buyer's opportunity to verify that the property is in substantially the same condition as when the contract was signed, and that any agreed-upon repairs have been completed. If deficiencies are found, the buyer's agent must notify escrow and the listing agent before closing to determine whether an escrow holdback or other remedy is appropriate. Proceeding with closing while issues remain unresolved can expose the licensee and broker to claims of negligence or failure to act in the client's best interest. Commissioner's Rule R42811-A reinforces the licensee's obligation to deal fairly and honestly with all parties and to ensure accurate representation of material facts through the entire process, including closing and possession. An example helps illustrate how these duties play out. A buyer in Phoenix discovers during the final walkthrough that the seller did not remove personal property and left behind broken appliances. The buyer's agent immediately contacts the escrow officer, broker, and seller's agent. The parties agree to delay closing by 1 day and document the agreement through an addendum. The agent also submits a copy of the updated contract and escrow instructions to the broker for record retention. This professional handling not only ensures compliance with Arizona law, but also demonstrates the duty of good faith, diligence, and reasonable care expected of all real estate licensees. Discussion. What is the significance of recordation in the Arizona closing process? Answer. Recordation legally transfers ownership of the property, marking the official completion of the transaction and triggering the buyer's right to possession. Why is documentation retention so critical for brokers and licensees? Answer. Because it ensures compliance with state law, provides evidence of proper handling in the event of disputes or audits, and protects both the broker and the client. Why must possession arrangements be documented in writing? Answer. To clearly define the rights and responsibilities of both parties, prevent misunderstandings, and protect against liability if damage or disputes arise after closing. Review summary. The closing process is the culmination of all contractual obligations and the point where ownership and possession officially transfer. In Arizona, closing occurs when the deed is recorded and funds are released to the seller. Licensees play a crucial role in ensuring this process is executed correctly, maintaining clear communication, fulfilling ethical obligations, and ensuring compliance with statutory and regulatory requirements. Proper documentation, timely handling of trust funds, and clear possession agreements are vital components of lawful closing practices. Arizona law requires brokers to retain all transaction records for at least 5 years, safeguarding transparency and accountability. The duty of good faith and fair dealing continues through closing, requiring honesty, diligence, and care to ensure that all parties receive the benefit of their bargain. When closing and possession are handled professionally and in compliance with Arizona's statutes and commissioner's rules, the transaction concludes smoothly, protecting clients and reinforcing the integrity of the real estate profession.